With the acquisition of Domantas Sabonis at last year's trade deadline, the Sacramento Kings entered a win-now mode as they tried to break their playoff curse. With that in mind, they had to approach this offseason with the mindset of winning now and reaching the playoffs. And honestly, their moves were quite good. For the typical blunders of the Sacramento Kings front office, they had a fairly successful offseason. So let's talk about their offseason and whether it has the chance to propel them to finally making the playoffs. The Sacramento Kings started off their offseason with some lottery luck as they jumped up to the 4th overall pick in the 2022 NBA Draft. They made a good pick here as well, as many would have hoped or expected Jaden Ivey was selected. They selected the safe high floor wing in Keegan Murray, and he already looks very promising in Summer League. He will immediately be able to come in and make an impact as one of the more NBA-ready prospects in this draft class. He can come in and get some good three-point shooting. He can come in and give some defense, and his production in Summer League has already shown that. Not to mention the fact that the Sacramento Kings' weakest position at the time and still is at the forward position. And so Keegan Murray addresses a lot of needs for this Kings roster. As free agency opened, the Kings got their hands on a good scoring guard to improve their bench quality. Malik Monk had a great season last year with the Lakers and was amongst a bright spot on a struggling team. He significantly improved his efficiency and continued to show he can be a good off-the-ball catch-and-shoot three-point shooter, can get his own bucket when needed, and will make him especially valuable to the second unit as he plays alongside Davion Mitchell. It is also worth noting that Malik Monk played his college ball at Kentucky alongside De'Aaron Fox, and some of that chemistry could bode well for both of them heading into the next season. After the addition of Malik Monk, the Kings still lacked a fourth guard, and ideally a starting shooting guard alongside De'Aaron Fox, which is exactly what they acquired in Kevin Huerter. He will immediately come in and be a great fit alongside De'Aaron Fox. He won't require the ball in his hands for his own isolation touches, but will provide some very good three-point shooting and spacing, allowing more space for Fox and Sabonis, amongst others, to operate and get to the bucket. The return was fairly significant. Giving up a first-round pick and two solid rotational pieces is not insignificant value for Kevin Huerter, but it was a need the Kings needed to address, with all other starting roles being accounted for other than shooting guard, and with the Kings in a win-now mode for at least the next 2 years while Domantas Sabonis is contracted to the Kings. This is the type of move that has to be made for the Kings to reach the play-in tournament in the Western Conference. We can talk about the Kings improving all we want, but ultimately it doesn't matter if they're not good enough to make the play-in tournament and finally have a chance of reaching the playoffs for the first time since the 05-06 season. Well, when we are discussing how good the odds are of the Kings making the play-in tournament, we have to discuss the absurd quality of the Western Conference. As rosters currently stand, and assuming no injuries, there are currently 8 teams in the Western Conference that are comfortably better than the Kings that will secure spots in the playoffs or play-in tournament ahead of them, as I firmly believe any 8 of these teams, if at their best and if healthy, could all be top 4 seeds. These 8 teams are the Phoenix Suns, who even with the possible departure of DeAndre Ayton and with a flame out of last year's playoffs, will still be one of the better teams in the West. The Dallas Mavericks, who have lost Jalen Brunson but have significantly improved their center position and will be entering their second full year under head coach Jason Kidd. The Golden State Warriors, who were defending champions and will be amongst the elite once again. The Denver Nuggets, who have the 2-time defending MVP with Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. both likely back from injury. The LA Clippers, who will have Paul George and Kawhi returning alongside John Wall and a full season of Norman Powell. The Minnesota Timberwolves, with the addition of Rudy Gobert and the further development of Anthony Edwards, and a New Orleans Pelicans team who have Zion Williamson returning, a full season of DJ McCollum, alongside another year of development from Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. In my opinion, barring any injuries or any significant roster changes throughout the rest of the offseason, the Kings, nor any other team in the West, is touching those 8 teams. That leaves 2 play-in tournament spots available. And although the Kings may not be the favorites for it, they are in for a chance. So who's their competition? Well, as much as the Lakers struggled last season, any team with LeBron as AD is going to have a chance at making the playoffs, even if they don't make any other moves, which I think is unlikely, as I would imagine even if Kyrie doesn't join, one of Buddy Hield or some type of role player of that caliber will end up joining the Lakers via trade this offseason. They need to stay much healthier than last year, but if they can, the Lakers, of course, with those two star players, will be a threat to make the playoffs once again. The Portland Trailblazers will also be back in the mix with Damian Lillard back from injury, Anthony Simons back from injury, as they will lead the backcourt alongside the addition of Jeremy Grant and a full season of Josh Hart. They are still just a good team, but they are still good enough to be in the mix for the play-in tournament once again. And the Utah Jazz could still be in the mix, which is fully dependent on what happens with Donovan Mitchell. But as long as Donovan Mitchell is on this team alongside the competent role players around him, they will be good enough to be at least in the realm of contention for the play-in tournament. The Rockets, the Thunder, and the Spurs will all likely be set for the lottery again next season, even with improved years from OKC and the Rockets. So that makes the Kings one of 4 teams that will likely be competing for 2 play-in tournament spots. So what's the case for the Kings making the play-in tournament? The Sacramento Kings starting lineup is very new and improved. De'Aaron Fox continues to be the starting point guard of the Kings and is the clear lead guard of the future with Tyrese now out of town. It started as a bit of a down year last year for Fox, but he quietly went crazy once Tyrese Halliburton left and Sabonis arrived, and nobody talked about it. Absolutely nobody, while he was playing the best 2-month stretch of his career. In this backcourt to himself, he had a promising 2-man game with Sabonis and was shooting the 3 at a very good rate. And not just a good rate for Fox, just a good rate. He shot over 37% from 3 on 28 points per game over this stretch. And it's unlikely we'll see that continue to that exact level, but if we can continue to see another level with the 2-man game with Sabonis and continued improvement in his 3-point shooting, then Fox can truly become an elite point guard in the NBA, and currently, I'm buying into that stock for De'Aaron Fox next season. As previously mentioned, Kevin Huerter is a very good backcourt addition alongside De'Aaron Fox. I expect he will fit in seamlessly as Huerter can step right in and provide some good 3-point shooting and very valuable floor spacing, opening up just a little bit more space for Fox and Sabonis to operate in their individual games and their 2-man game. Harrison Barnes, despite trade rumors over the last couple of years, continues to remain in Sacramento. And he's a very valuable 3-and-D wing on a team that is now in win-now mode and obviously is not going to be traded over the next couple of years, assuming that direction maintains. He is low maintenance with regards to isolation offensive touches, competes hard every night, and it's the type of player that the Kings are going to need to push back to winning basketball. Keegan Murray, as previously mentioned, was the perfect selection at number 4 for the Kings. He addresses their needs at the power forward position, is an NBA-ready player who is ready to come in and provide some good 3-point shooting, some level of spacing, and good defense, and ultimately is a high-floor, safe pick. Something that you can't go wrong with if you are the Kings in a win-now mode. And Domantas Sabonis rounds out the starting lineup as the big acquisition of the 2022 trade deadline, as he will enter his first full year in Sacramento. The 2-man game between him and De'Aaron Fox looked very promising in the limited time we did see it last year, and I would expect it will take another step forward in the 2022-23 season. As far as depth goes, there's some strengths and there's some weaknesses, to say the least. The guard depth is young, but solid and has some good upside. The biggest problem with the guard depth might be inconsistency, with Monk being a streaky shooter at time, Davion only entering year 2, and Terrence Davis being streaky in his own right and also coming back from a long-term injury. That lack of production due to their inconsistencies could hurt them on some nights. But despite that, I would expect Davion Mitchell to be more consistent in his second year than in his rookie season while being a more influential presence on defense, and expect Monk to fill back into his 6th-man role where he can provide some spacing in lineups alongside his college teammate, but can also be the primary shot creator and maker for the second unit. As far as big man depth goes, the Kings are in an amazing spot, as one of the top centers of 2021 free agency in Richaun Holmes is now a backup behind an all-star. There have been some rumblings of a trade that would see him land a starting role for next season in another organization, but it appears interest is currently low across the league, and the current expectations is that the Kings will have Richaun Holmes for the beginning of the season, giving the Kings one of the best center rotations in the NBA. Not to mention that Trey Lyles is also on the roster, who played the best basketball of his career after the trade deadline last year in Sacramento. But this is when we have to discuss the weakness of the Kings bench. The wing depth for next season, well, to put it mildly, is very much lacking, and you could argue it's basically non-existent, as you could argue that there is currently no true wings off of the bench for the Kings next season after trading away Maurice Harkless. That is, if you consider Chimezie Metu and Trey Lyles to be big men. Personally, I expect both to play power forward, with Metu being mobile enough to be considered a wing and having the defensive capabilities to guard wings well, while Trey Lyles is more of a true big man. But the point being is the Kings need wings, true wings, specifically someone who can play at small forward, something the Kings currently do not have off of their bench. And unfortunately, free agency doesn't offer many remaining options at that position, with Isaac Bonga, Jake Layman, and Yuta Watanabe being amongst the best remaining options. It likely leaves the Kings in a spot for next season where the small forward rotation will be makeshift outside of Harrison Barnes. Keegan Murray may see himself slide up to the 3 at times if he is not on the floor alongside Harrison Barnes, and Chimezie Metu, although probably more of a center than a small forward, will likely see some minutes there as well. But the most likely option is that Terrence Davis, who played roughly half of his minutes at small forward last year, will again see a not insignificant amount of playing time as a forward in the upcoming season, thanks to the Kings' lack of wing depth, which could prove to be one of the biggest problems regarding this team's upcoming year, specifically on the defensive end of the floor. Because although Terrence Davis has played at small forward, that doesn't make him a small forward. He is a shooting guard. Despite their weaknesses, specifically with their wing depth, this is one of the better Kings rosters we have seen over the last 15 years, with a roster construction and fit amongst their key players that makes sense and should fit together well on the court. But in a strong Western Conference, they have an uphill battle to push for the play-in tournament. Personally, I'm expecting a massive season from De'Aaron Fox and the continued development of the two-man game between Fox and Sabonis. I also expect the addition of Keegan Murray and Kevin Huerter will be valuable additions and good fits on this roster. But I do think teams such as Portland, the Lakers, and Utah, assuming Donovan Mitchell's on the roster, will have a slight upper hand in the battle for the play-in tournament. This Kings team is better than the 2015-16 team that made the 10 seed, but the league has improved significantly from a talent perspective since then. The Western Conference is absolutely stacked, and in turn, this Kings roster may not quite be enough to make the play-in tournament.